Hey, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. If you've been following along for the last couple of weeks, you'll know that we're right in the middle of a series I'm calling How I Edit My Wedding Films, where we talk through all the kind of behind the scenes details of how I edit my films, from organizing pre-production to audio storyboarding to the visual edit to visual effects and all that stuff. And today we're talking about one of the most important parts of editing wedding films, and that's coffee. So one of the things you're gonna wanna make sure you have whenever you edit a wedding film is a good pour over, a good latte, an Americano, just something like that to kind of give you the kick to keep going. No, I'm just kidding. Today we're talking about color grading. And honestly, color grading is arguably one of the most complicated parts of editing wedding film, but today we're gonna dive into all that kind of stuff. I'm not kidding on coffee though. Coffee is massively important. Make sure you have coffee with you whenever you edit your films. It'll make them so much better. All right, let's dive into it. All right, so here's the thing on color grading. Color grading is exceptionally complex, and there's honestly so many different paths to get to the exact same result when you're color grading. Whether you use color wheels, curves, just the basic kind of exposure panel, scopes, or you use the histogram, or all these different things that you might not even know what they are. There's so many different ways to kind of all get to the same result. But my point here is there's not just one specific way to color grade your wedding films. And so what I'm not trying to do today is I'm not trying to say that I am the authority, I am the best at this. I'm not a professional colorist. There's people out there who are way better and way more technically experienced than I am. But what I do feel like I have done over the last couple of years is really dialed in my color grading process through a ton of trial and error, through a ton of just kind of repetition and doing things over and over again, which I think is honestly probably the definition of experience. And so that's what I want to do today, is just kind of share my 3-step process for color grading my wedding films. All right, so step one, and we talked about this last week, but I'm going to hit this again. Step one is getting things right in camera. Getting things right in camera is super, super critical, because effectively you're editing like a JPEG image that doesn't have a lot of latitude in terms of what you can do with color, what you can do with light, what you can do with kind of just the overall color science of that clip. I know a lot of people who shoot log format, which is basically a super, super flat format that kind of just like desaturates, decontrast, just kind of feels a lot more like a gray image that you can just add contrast, add saturation, add kind of depth to later. I don't do that personally. When I shoot my wedding films, I shoot in a little bit more of a neutral profile on the camera, but I really like the colors that Canon has right out of camera. It's one of the reasons I shoot Canon. And so I try to simplify my workflow as much as possible. I just found that works really, really well with my process to just kind of get things right in camera, pay attention to my white balance, my color, the overall kind of feel and mood of the shot, and take the time to dial things in on the camera so that once I get to the editing room, once I actually open up Premiere, I don't have to do a ton of fixing. The clip is almost all the way there already. So step one in the whole color grading process is just take the time, get things right in camera, think of it as editing on the fly. It will make a world of difference when you actually jump into Premiere and actually start editing things. So step two in this process is an adjustment layer. I add an adjustment layer over the entire timeline, over the entire sequence of my wedding film. Think of an adjustment layer basically as a blank layer that doesn't do anything to the clips below it unless you actually edit that adjustment layer. And so if you took the adjustment layer and like boosted the exposure on the adjustment layer, it'll boost the exposure of every single clip that's below it. I add an adjustment layer over my entire sequence, and then I'll apply a LUT, which is basically like a video preset, to that adjustment layer. And then I'll also do some basic kind of color tweaking and exposure tweaking adjustments to that adjustment layer without actually editing any of the clips. Pro tip on the LUT, LUTs tend to be a little bit intense, and so I tend to dial back that intensity down to about 40 to 70%, kind of depending on the wedding film, depending on how things turned out in camera, how much of that LUT I actually need. But basically think about getting things right in camera, and then the LUT kind of just like finesses those colors a little bit for you, finesses those tones a little bit, just kind of adds a little bit more spice to the actual look. And then I'll go through, dial in the exposure a little bit more. Maybe I want to have a little bit brighter film, so I'm gonna boost the exposure by like 0.2, 0.3, something like that. I might drop the contrast a little bit, boost the shadows a little bit. I tend to add a curves adjustment to the entire adjustment layer, basically bringing down the highlights a little bit, which just softens up the kind of harsh digital highlights that you get on digital cameras. I might lift the shadows a little bit, just kind of soften those blacks, give it a little bit more of a film vibe. And so basically I add this adjustment layer to the entire sequence, the entire timeline, kind of apply this preset over all these clips and do some basic kind of white balance and exposure corrections to the entire sequence. Then I'll build my entire sequence adjustments. And then step 3 is that I go back into every single clip and do light and color adjustments on every single clip. And that means going through and adjusting the white balance, adjusting the exposure, the contrast, the blacks, the shadows, the whites, the highlights, split toning adjustments if I want to add some color to the shadows, maybe adding another curves layer to an individual clip to kind of soften that up or brighten that up a little bit. And this is by far the thing that takes the longest time in terms of color grading. But it's super fun at the end because then you can kind of go back and watch the entire film from start to finish and go, wow, I feel like all these colors are starting to actually feel cohesive now. And this is where the entire kind of color edit takes place and all that stuff really gets finessed together, is when you go back in, edit every single clip and get everything right. So that basically is my entire 3-step process on how I color grade my films. Step 1 is just getting it right in camera. Step 2 is that adjustment layer and some big macro edits to the entire film. And then step 3 is those micro adjustments to every single clip to kind of make everything feel cohesive, make everything come together and feel like one nice, happy, cohesive wedding film. So hopefully that's been a helpful look at my color grading process. Again, I am by no means the expert. This is just my workflow, my process, how I do things for my wedding films. If you have different ways of doing this, if you want to kind of leave some advice in the comments, I would love to hear your opinions and your thoughts on color grading. If this video has been helpful for you, feel free to drop a like. And if you're interested in following along with my channel and my work, I release videos every single week, so double check, make sure you are subscribed, hit that little notification bell. Really encourages me as a creator and also really supports the channel. All right, thanks so much. I'll see you guys next week. Peace.